Hello and welcome to Roundtable with me, David Foster. Why is there what appears to be a huge societal split between those who say wearing masks is essential and those who just won't do it? It's not so much medical, apparently, as all in the mind. Masks can make us unable to communicate. Someone wearing one can look untrustworthy. There are associations with criminality, and yet they could save lives. The debate has got some people very agitated indeed.
To most people, wearing a mask seems to be the most logical way to protect oneself and others from infection in the coronavirus pandemic. But psychologists say many people have deep-seated concerns when it comes to wearing masks. They've long been associated with criminality. For some, they incite a sense of fear and mistrust. Most of us rely heavily on seeing expressions from the lower half of the face, the mouth and lips, to aid communication and decipher emotions. Psychologists argue that when we can only see the eyes, everyday interactions become exhausting and anxiety-inducing. Masks are also unfamiliar to many cultures in everyday life, unlike in East Asian countries where it's the norm, and Muslim countries where women more commonly wear a veil. A YouGov poll estimated only 38% of the UK public wore masks, contrasted to 88% in Spain and 90% in Singapore prior to the introduction of compulsory mask wearing. In the US, wearing a mask or not is a matter of personal freedom for many people. Some critics say inconsistent government and media messaging has created confusion, making this issue a partisan one. It appears that masks are here to stay as the COVID-19 pandemic continues. So will members of the public change their attitude towards covering up?
Very pleased to say that we can welcome from Surrey in the UK, Dr. Krish Nath, a cognitive behavioural therapist, and in London, Dr. Becky Spelman, psychologist and clinical director of the private therapy clinic on Harley Street. Then to the east coast of the US, Baltimore, in fact, where we welcome Tim Akers, professor of public health at Morgan State University. I'm going to kick off with this one to you, Becky. You can also reply, Tim and Krish, afterwards. Why do people mistrust people wearing masks?
Different reasons for different people, but for many people, they might have had some past negative experiences. So perhaps if they've had an experience of a burglary or they've seen a lot of that on movies or TV. And for other people, facial expressions are what we rely on. And really, this is our most basic instinct. We, as tiny babies, we have facial expressions that we can recognize and rely on to interpret what people mean and their intentions. And our brains have to work so much harder if we don't have that. So when that's taken away, it becomes confusing for us. And that's kind of a frustration that's created. And our brains have to work so much harder to figure out, is someone a friend or foe? Can we trust this person? Are they being friendly? Because what we can see is so limited. All we've got is their eyes and trying to rely on that to gauge what someone's intentions are.
Krish, you were nodding in agreement. Is this a learned behaviour or is it instinctive?
I think it's a bit of both. People actually learn how to make judgments and what risk they're prepared to take in terms of coming into confrontation with other people, and trust is one of the main factors that underline human interaction. It reinforces self-confidence. It reinforces your ability to communicate with ease when you trust the other person. So I agree with Rebecca in that if you cannot observe clearly the social signals, the facial social signals that people are giving, it makes that job of trusting very difficult and leads to uncertainty about the other person.
Tim, I know you'll talk a little bit more in a while about the United States and the particular personal issues that seem to have surfaced there. But from what I've heard from Becky and Krish so far, it would not seem to be irrational to not really like watching somebody else wearing a mask.
I completely concur with Chris and Becky in terms of how you can't read the micro expressions of the face. Now, while I am in public health, I've also worked in law enforcement. So when you go in wearing a mask, all you see is someone's eyes. Recently, I went to the bank, and it just did not feel natural going into the bank with a mask covering my face. And so when I think about it and I look at somebody and I only see their eyes, just in the context of like from a public health point of view, if we're trying to assess someone, then you're just looking at their eyes. You can't detect or assess their expression, their overall anxiety, their fears. But I can't speak as to trust. That's something that actually is an extremely complicated dynamic that plays out with wearing the mask, as far as I'm concerned.
But you can tell if somebody's smiling by their eyes. You can tell if they're frightened by their eyes. It's not like you can't read them all together. Becky?
You can't always tell whether someone is smiling when you only see their eyes. For some people, they'll get enough movement in their eyes, or they have to force a bit more movement so that you can see if they're smiling or what might be going on emotionally. But we're having to work so much harder. And whereas we would have been able to make such quick assumptions on such a subconscious level previously, we're now having to consciously make decisions and really stretch ourselves to try and figure out what emotion someone might be experiencing.
Do you understand? Oh, yeah, Tim.
David, if I might interject with exactly what Becky stated. I recently had a meeting with a colleague, actually a face-to-face meeting, wearing a mask. We were both wearing masks.
If that isn't counterintuitive.
Exactly. But it was extremely difficult for me to read that person in terms of the complexity of what we were discussing. I couldn't see the micro expressions of their face, of their mouth. I could look at their eyes, but I could not at all grasp whether they agreed or disagreed with me.
Krish, are we getting used to it though?
Yes, very much so. I can give you a couple of examples over the years where, for instance, over the last 15 or 20 years, since the SARS, I have observed many Asian travelers to the UK often wear a mask going out. And they seem to be quite comfortable wearing their masks. But it often brings a lot of criticisms from the British public. Another case would be Muslim women who actually wear a veil. And they have been the subject of significant humiliation and abuse in the public, so much so that even going through places like the airport, special rules had to be made in order to get them to unveil through the checkpoints. And what I'm saying here is that they weren't thinking, the public isn't thinking that these people are burglars or they're there to cause them harm. They're thinking that they just can't read them.
And we need to be able to read people all the time, do we?
Well, if we're going to make connections with them, yes.
Okay, I wonder what you guys make of Stephen Riker from University of St Andrews in Scotland. He says people are getting more and more used to it, but he puts this point out. Their masks can invoke a sense of humiliation and shame. If I cover, I must have something shameful I don't want people to see. Tim? Oh, sorry, Becky. Yeah.
I was going to say, we all have different beliefs about wearing masks or things that we have to do right now that we didn't have to previously do, such as self-isolating when you come back from certain countries. And this triggers different things for different people. For some people, wearing a mask might trigger shame. For other people, it might feel so much safer and they might feel actually I'm protecting my health by wearing a mask. So really, it depends on the individual, their past experiences, their beliefs about themselves, the world, other people. So really, it's so wide and varied, and some people feel that taking these precautions means that they're now living in as much safety as possible. It makes them feel more comfortable, and then we've got people who really don't like being told what to do, and they kind of want to rebel against the rules, and they sort of, some people just feel uncomfortable about having to do things because they really don't like being restricted, and they really don't like being told what to do, and therefore some people will just not wear a mask because they don't want to be told that they have to live their lives in a certain way.
Yeah, and I was going to come to Tim about that and the personal issue, but I mean, this is a British writer in one of the Sunday magazines saying, Rod Little, in fact, saying anti-maskers believe it's the thin end of the wedge, and I'm paraphrasing, that we may be wearing masks forever. They believe it is a power grab. If today they can make you wear masks, which they once told us were of no use, what might they make you do tomorrow? This is one of the big arguments you hear in the United States, Tim, isn't it?
It is, actually. When you have the lack of evidence-based science saying about when and where you should wear the mask, because there are a lot of public health related issues, because the mask, its density, if it's below your nose, all these different factors. But if we're wearing it as a basis to just force people to try to comply, then that's a little disconcerting. But if we're using it as a basis to legitimately implement policy-related science, then that's a different story.
But you see, an awful lot of Americans believe personal freedom is the most important thing. That's what the country was founded on. And they say, look, you are not going to tell me what to do.
Well, but let me interject, David. The point is that I think that is not, I don't know the type of media you all get from the U.S., but by and large, from my reading, a whole genre of different news outlets across the social media as well as mainstream media, I don't actually get that. Most Americans, at least anecdotally, are very much in compliance. Here's where the problem lies, though. When you have large numbers of civil unrest and civil protests, rightly so, and then there are vast numbers of people not wearing masks, and then vast numbers of people, then there's inconsistencies. And then you have some businesses that are allowed to open back up, and some people are allowed to operate their businesses while others not in compliance. So we're seeing from a policy point of view, a lot of inconsistencies. And when these inconsistencies occur, that makes the average human being, the average citizen, question, are my rights in some ways being violated?
So it's very much about, if the message was clear, if we'd known from the start perhaps that this was the right thing to do, then people might be more compliant. Krish, you wanted to come in?
Yes, I was going to say that, we are in a pandemic at the moment, and we mustn't forget that at the very beginning of the lockdown, certainly in the UK, we were given repeated, clear messages that the science does not support the wearing of masks as a protective measure. And that certainly went on for the first 3 months of our lockdown. Now, suddenly, at the beginning of August, we're told that people entering into public transportation, into closed areas, must wear a mask. Now, either it offers protection or it doesn't. But it can't be 3 months ago, it wasn't, and suddenly.
Well, perhaps they didn't know 3 months ago, Krish.
But as I said to you earlier, for the last 15 years, the Chinese have and other Asian people have been traveling the world, and many of them actually wear masks. Now, they're doing it for a reason, and I don't think they're doing it to protect anyone else. They're doing it because they believe it protects them.
Well, perhaps they are more compliant. We will talk about that in just a moment. I'm going to play a clip from Tom Hanks in a minute, Tim, but I know you wanted to say something before I do that.
Well, just real quick to interject what Chris was saying. When we have the N95 mask, we know that controls about 95% of the particulate matter that can affect. And so that's a very solid, and it's used by clinicians every single day. But it's disconcerting when individuals are the lack of evidence, as Chris was mentioning as well. And some people are just wearing a bandana to cover their face. And then it has scientifically questionable benefit.
Well, let's listen to Tom Hanks, because he got COVID-19, and then he got very, very cross about people who didn't wear masks in the future. I'll play it so you can hear it.
Whether or not we like it, we're all in this together. We're all affected by this. So let's, at the very least, there's a lot of stuff you can do beyond that, but at the very least, 3 tiny things is in everybody's wheelhouse if you choose to do them. Wear a mask, wash your hands, social distance. If you can't do that, I don't have much respect for you. It's pretty easy to do your part. If you drive a car, you got to use your turn signal, not drive too fast, and avoid pedestrians. Those are 3 things that should be pretty easy to do. And COVID-19, if we social distance, wear a mask, and wash our hands, we'll be able to get along. So let's do that.
So there he says, I don't have much respect for people who don't wear masks and do all of the other things. It's dividing society. It's dangerous, Becky, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, Tom Hanks has had COVID. His beliefs about what people should do are perhaps going to be more extreme than other people who haven't had that experience. And I'm not saying that he's right or wrong. I think people are very adaptable, and that with time, people will adapt to what is actually best. However, right now, people are being asked to do a lot of very different things. It's not just that they're being asked to wear masks. The world is now operating in a very different way. People are having to stay at home, self-isolate. There's a lot of restrictions on travel. It's a lot to ask people to do all at once. And while people are remarkable at adapting, it's just going to take time. And reasonable, good, kind, considerate people will adapt to these measures with time.
How do you, and this is one for each one of you, I'll start with you, Krish, how do you encourage what seems to be needed here, which is tolerance?
Well, tolerance, we habituate to intolerance. When we're asked to make changes, especially when we're not accustomed to doing things in a certain way, or for instance, wear something like a mask, which is not the most natural thing to do when you go out. It is about getting accustomed to the feel, to the method of training your mind that you have to wear a mask, or you need to wear a mask. It's for good reasons. You understand it. And training the mind to remember to actually put it on. Once the mind is informed, it becomes easier to be tolerant. Once the mind understands that we are doing this for good reasons.
Yeah, I'm wondering if perhaps, Becky, that this is about, and same for you, Tim, this is about helping people to conquer their fears. How do we go about that? Fears from either side. Fears of wearing the mask, or fears of people who aren't wearing the mask?
Really, if people are overly anxious, some people are restricting themselves, they're avoiding situations right now. Those people need to, of course, take the right precautions and sensible precautions, but not be overly restrictive. They need to get out there and try to live their lives as normally as possible while taking safety measures. And people are going to be triggered, about this tolerance thing, that because so many different emotions are being triggered in individuals, we're not our most tolerant when we're agitated, anxious, frustrated. And we have to understand that emotions are high, and people are being triggered so much more than normal because of the way that the world now is, and because their lives have changed so rapidly in such a short space of time. And I think with time, people will be triggered less and will have less of these intense emotions, anxiety, frustration, anger, and things will start to become more normal in this new normal.
Could it be that there is a complete switch? This one again for you, Becky, because I want to ask you about the US in a minute, Tim. There's a complete switch that rather than being perhaps reluctant to wear masks and resentful of it, people who wear masks become resentful of those that don't.
Of course, I've seen this. I see this on public transport. I, really see the passive aggressive expression sometimes on people's face when they see that the other person has just sat down on the London Underground and taken a seat right beside them, and they're not wearing a mask when the individual is. And yes, people do have expectations of other people because of their own anxieties. And there's a lot of people who have very high levels of health anxiety, and that is going to mean that they're very anxious about other people not wearing masks. And we're all affected by this. We all are affected emotionally by COVID, and I think we have to have an understanding for sometimes people are going to be overreacting because of other people's behaviors, and that's not necessarily doesn't make them a bad person. They've got their own internal world of emotions going on, and no one can be perfect right now. This is our lives have been completely thrown upside down, and everyone is just trying to cope.
I'll tell you a story in just a moment about my local supermarket, which I think is doing a very good job in informing people about mask wearing. But we'll come back to that in just a moment, because I promised Tim a chance to come in at this point. Election year, a partisan issue. It's turning into something more than just personal freedom or medical necessity. It's becoming a political tool.
Yeah, in many ways, David, I would agree with you. And also I agree with my other panelists in terms of it will take time, but this new normal is evolving. But it is a political year for the United States, very much so. And not only a regional, local, but a national. And with the change or the issues around presidential selection and things of that nature. Right now, America, as you know, we're a nation of civil liberties, civil rights. We're a nation of individual rights. And it comes down to most Americans, by and large, when there's solid evidence, they'll tend to not question it. But when you have a lot of debate, a lot of inconsistencies, then that becomes a major issue. Now, when it comes to people going on into a store or something of that nature, and they're wearing a mask, and if they have a respiratory issue or if they have an autoimmune disease, things of this nature that could either protect them or put them more at risk, we're at a point now to where they're hearing such inconsistent messages from social media, from mainstream media. And I think what it comes down to is we really need to bring some solid evidence-based science into this. And as Chris was mentioning earlier, it was the inconsistencies around early March when we began seeing it, both from the WHO and other places all over the country, the UK, the US, inconsistencies in terms of wearing the mask. Our learning curve, mind you, did grow, and we did gain more knowledge in it. But we've known a long time about the nature of masks, the benefit of it, and at times, if you don't wear the proper mask, it can have an effect on, its viability.
Krish, let's go back to tolerance, if we can, for just a moment, because one of the things I'm wondering, you reference women wearing face veils, whether the experience of wearing a mask oneself, actually, I think it's now known as a face covering, perhaps because masks have the wrong connotations. Whether it will encourage people to understand face veils and the like a little bit more.
I think that it will certainly make people step back and think about how they perceive others, and especially where there are differences. And perhaps they will learn to be more accepting of the values of other cultures, especially as repeating it, people like the Asians who come over here and they've been wearing masks routinely.
And very quickly, you don't think they wear masks because they're just compliant, because everybody started doing it and they thought, well, I don't want to look different.
Well, they don't have to be compliant when they're traveling to London from China. They can do as they wish. They are choosing to wear it in the streets of London and England. And the same with the Muslim women who wear veils. That is part of their culture, and they wear it wherever they go.
Becky, and this is for all of you, but I don't think we've got enough time to bring Tim back in at this point. And Krish, thank you very much indeed. But Becky, my local supermarket plays out a message that says not everybody has a reason that you will see for not wearing a mask. Please be more understanding. And it's that level of encouragement to other people to look beyond the most obvious that we really need to learn, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really lovely. I have a friend who's got breathing problems and he can't wear a mask, but people wouldn't know that and it's not going to be at the forefront of their mind. So it's nice to have that reminder. And it's also, for me, that kind of reminder is also a reminder to just respect everyone's wishes right now, that, not everyone has bad intentions just because they don't look like they're complying. And, and the more that we can just empathize with everyone's situation right now, it makes it so much easier to try and live our lives in what are very difficult conditions.
Okay, time for just one quickie, Tim. I'll bring you back in. Are we going to have to get used to this and do it for years and years and years?
Well, let's just hope this pandemic right there is something that's not going to be the new normal. We're using the phrase new normal because we're trying to adapt, but let's just hope over the time that this is going to be something that we can learn from and adapt if it gets any worse.
Okay, listen, thank you very much indeed. Thank you, much appreciated. Krish, Becky and Tim, thank you for your time. Thank you wherever you happen to be for watching this program. I'm David Foster, but it takes a whole team to put this together and get these people on our TV screens. We hope to have your company on another occasion. In the meantime, go to our YouTube channel, and that applies to you three as well. If you would like to, you'll find all the roundtables we've done over the last 3 years there. That's TRT World Roundtable on YouTube. From me, David Foster, thank you for watching. Hope to have your company again. But until then, goodbye.